The spring morning was overcast, with low gray clouds drifting lazily over the marshes outside Charleston. A soft breeze moved through the palmettos as Rachel stepped out of the Uber, clutching a leather-bound notebook in one hand and a stainless steel water bottle in the other. She took a moment to adjust the collar of her light beige coat, the kind that had no designer label but still carried a quiet grace. Her auburn hair was tied in a loose knot, strands framing her face naturally. No makeup, no jewelry, no bold colors, just the understated elegance of someone who wasn't trying to impress, only to understand. At 27, Rachel had the kind of beauty that didn't scream for attention. It settled slowly into the eyes of those who took the time to really look. She walked up the wide stone steps of the Bellwood Hartman Real Estate Group, a sleek glass and brick building nestled among historic oaks and new money developments. The lobby was a careful blend of Southern charm and modern ambition: exposed beams, matte black fixtures, fresh-cut peonies on marble countertops. On a display near the entrance, a miniature model of a new luxury development stretched across a polished wood table. There were rows of pristine white townhomes, a private dock with sailboats, and a winding path through a man-made park. A brass plaque beside it read, "Harbor's Edge, where legacy meets luxury." Rachel glanced at it, her expression unreadable, then made her way toward the reception desk. She didn't have a glossy folder or an entourage, just a handwritten list in her notebook and a quiet focus. The receptionist barely glanced up. She was young, sleek, and distracted, speaking quickly into a wireless earpiece while typing with acrylic nails. Rachel waited patiently, but after a full minute, she gently cleared her throat. The receptionist, startled, gave a tight-lipped smile. "Hi, I'm here for the Harbor's Edge tour," Rachel said with polite warmth. "I received an invitation through." Before she could finish, a woman in a sharp navy pantsuit walked briskly into view, holding a tablet and wearing the exact kind of heels that sound like authority on marble. You could tell from the way the staff straightened that she was one of the top agents. Blonde hair pulled into a sleek low bun, designer watch peeking from beneath her cuff, and a voice that had mastered the art of smiling without meaning it. "Sorry, ma'am," Holly interrupted before Rachel could even say her full name. "Today's tour is by registration only. It's a private preview for qualified clients." Rachel blinked. "I did receive an invitation. I believe my name should be on." "I'm sure you did," Holly replied smoothly, glancing her over with a trained eye that lingered just a second too long on Rachel's coat and notebook. "Sometimes our mailing list gets a little generous. Happens all the time. But today we're prioritizing buyers who are already in pre-approval or under review. Just helps keep things efficient." She smiled, but there was no welcome in it. Behind her, a pair of middle-aged couples walked in, dressed in coastal chic linen, silk, soft pastel cashmere. Holly lit up, pivoting away without a second thought. "So glad you could make it," she said, voice rising in delight. "Right this way. The models are staged beautifully." Rachel stood where she was for a moment, her fingers gently curling around her notebook. The receptionist avoided eye contact now. A silence hung in the air, delicate but loaded. Rachel's gaze drifted back to the Harbor's Edge model. For a second, her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She simply stepped back from the reception area and sat down on a nearby bench beneath a framed rendering of a planned rooftop pool. She opened her notebook, turned to a page filled with precise sketches and tiny numbers, and began making quiet notes, as if the room hadn't just told her she didn't belong. The air inside the sales gallery grew warmer as more guests arrived, their voices mingling into a polite hum of conversation. Laughter, the clinking of crystal flutes, the muted tones of old money trying to sound casual. Rachel remained seated on the bench, out of the direct flow of the crowd, still holding her notebook. Occasionally scribbling down notes and small diagrams of the lot lines she remembered from the promotional materials she'd reviewed online. From where she sat, she could clearly see the main presentation area where the miniature model of Harbor's Edge gleamed under soft lighting, surrounded now by guests sipping champagne and nibbling on truffle crisps, served on silver trays by young, nervous assistants in navy vests. The room had taken on the low thrum of a stage being set, and the show was about to begin. Holly swept through the space like a conductor, guiding conversations, introducing herself with practiced warmth, punctuating each interaction with just enough personal charm to make it feel bespoke. Rachel watched her make the rounds, always smiling, always moving, always leading with confidence. Once or twice, Holly glanced toward her, a flicker of recognition in her gaze, but not acknowledgement, more like the way one glances at a misplaced umbrella or a silent fire alarm box on the wall. Rachel, meanwhile, remained quietly observant, taking in everything, the placement of the stage, the sequence of the presentation slides flickering to life on the wall-mounted screens, the way the assistants whispered into earpieces as they checked seating arrangements and refreshed ice buckets. The tour was set to begin in just a few minutes. A group of guests were now being ushered to the side entrance where electric golf carts waited to take them up the private drive to the model homes. Rachel rose and walked calmly to the check-in table, where a junior staffer with kind eyes and a clipboard stood checking names. "Excuse me," Rachel said gently. "I believe I'm on the list for the Harbor's Edge tour." Rachel M. Harlan. The assistant looked up, blinking, then glanced down the list. He ran a highlighter over a few names, paused, and squinted slightly. Rachel waited patiently, offering a warm but reserved smile. A moment later, the young man's eyes darted upward and caught something or someone over Rachel's shoulder. He straightened his posture, and a different tone entered his voice. "Let me just check with my manager for a moment," he said quickly, before stepping away and speaking in hushed tones with Holly, who had just returned from the golf cart area. Rachel didn't need to hear what was said. She saw it in Holly's face, a quick tightening around the mouth, the way she tilted her head dismissively, the sharp glance back toward Rachel that wasn't meant to be unfriendly but wasn't, by any stretch, warm. Holly walked back over herself, her heels clicking with authority on the polished concrete floor. She stopped just shy of Rachel, arms folded lightly, tablet still in hand. "I thought we'd already spoken," she said, voice level, pitched low to avoid drawing attention. "As I mentioned, today's event is curated for clients who have gone through pre-qualification." Rachel's voice was calm, and I mentioned that I received a direct invitation with my full name and credentials submitted. I confirmed by phone earlier this week. It should be noted in your system. Holly's smile was slight, measured, hollow. "Sometimes those confirmations are automated," she replied smoothly. "And to be perfectly honest, we've had several situations where people come in hoping to window shop, which is sweet in its way, but this property isn't really that kind of market. We're talking 7-figure buy-ins plus community association dues, equity agreements. Marina writes it's a very niche clientele." Rachel said nothing at first, and for a moment they simply stood across from one another, the space between them buzzing with invisible lines of assumption, boundary, judgment. From across the room, a pair of older women in tailored linen sets and matching pearl earrings noticed the interaction and nudged each other. One of them murmured something behind a raised hand, her gaze flickering toward Rachel's low ponytail, worn coat, and well-used notebook. "I understand," Rachel said finally, her voice quiet. "Though I'm surprised that a project as exclusive as this would be so concerned with appearance over process." The line hung in the air longer than Holly expected. There was something unsettling in the way Rachel said it, not confrontational, not bitter, but entirely self-assured. Holly hesitated, then recovered, giving a thin laugh. "It's not about appearance," she said, though her eyes betrayed her. "It's about time. Ours, yours. I wouldn't want you to waste it." "I'm not," Rachel answered softly. "You are?" Before anything further could be said, a commotion began at the front as the lead broker announced the carts were departing. The crowd began moving, gathering in small clusters, all smiles again. Holly turned away smoothly, her performance-ready face back in place, and Rachel was left standing beside the model of Harbor's Edge and watching as the group that was deemed qualified was ushered away. Among them was a man in a navy sports coat who glanced back at her briefly, uncertainly, before following his wife and their agent out the door. Rachel returned to her bench. She opened her notebook again. But this time she didn't write. She sat still, her fingers resting on the page. Her eyes drifted upward to the slogan etched into the wall above the display model, Harbor's Edge, where legacy meets luxury. And beneath it, in cursive, the phrase repeated in softer font, a vision shaped by those who dare to belong. Rachel looked at that last line for a long time. Then she closed her notebook, placed it on her lap, and sat with her hands folded, silent, still, uninvited and unbothered. The tour had left without her. But she wasn't leaving. Not yet. The minutes passed slowly after the tour group departed. Rachel sat in the same place, watching as the showroom emptied and the energy of the room dimmed like the soft fading of stage lights after a scene concludes. The assistants who had been so lively moments ago now moved in silence, clearing the half-empty flutes and abandoned hors d'oeuvres with mechanical efficiency. Someone reset the lighting around the miniature model, dimming the warm amber glow so that the homes now looked less like dreams and more like objects in a catalog. Holly had disappeared into the office wing with the lead broker, no doubt recounting how smoothly the morning had gone and how satisfied the clients seemed. To them, Rachel was no longer even a presence, she was residue, a smudge on an otherwise polished performance. Eventually, one of the junior agents, a young woman with dark curly hair and tired eyes, approached Rachel with hesitant steps and a clipboard hugged to her chest like a shield. She didn't seem unkind, just overworked, undertrained, and deeply uncomfortable. Her name tag read Mia. Excuse me, Mayim? She said, her voice barely audible. I was asked to let you know that the next available open house will be in 3 weeks. But that one's more general admission. You know, broader access. Rachel looked up at her, not with irritation or defiance, but with the weary composure of someone who had expected this eventual outcome long before it arrived. She studied Mia's expression, the discomfort in her eyes, the way she couldn't hold Rachel's gaze for more than a second. I see, Rachel said gently. And will that tour include access to the investment packet? Mia blinked, unsure how to respond. She fumbled with the clipboard, flipping through a few pages before stammering, I think that packet's only available through our pre-screened list. Like the guests today. Rachel nodded slowly. And who screens them? Oh, it goes through Holly. She's the senior partner for this region. There was an awkward silence, during which Mia seemed to shrink a little under the weight of her own assignment. She glanced toward the back hallway, clearly hoping for some kind of backup, but none came. Rachel closed her notebook and stood, smoothing her coat. Thank you for letting me know, she said simply, and the kindness in her voice made Mia's face fall a little more. It wasn't sarcasm. It wasn't passive aggression. It was real gratitude for someone who had merely delivered a message, albeit one soaked in polite exclusion. Rachel didn't leave the building immediately. She walked over to the model, now surrounded by informational plaques and laminated floor plans. She looked over every square inch of it with the focus of someone who had once drawn similar blueprints by hand, the edges of each building familiar, the angles of the rooftops and the spacing between units whispering secrets about structural priorities, solar angles, load-bearing walls. To the casual eye, she was just a curious woman looking too long at a pretty miniature. But Rachel was cataloging flaws, missed opportunities, hidden design compromises, and she saw them all. Behind her, 2 potential clients returned early from the tour, a couple in their mid-50s, both wearing Patagonia vests and tasteful silver jewelry. The woman noticed Rachel, did a double take, and gently tugged her husband's sleeve. Wasn't that the girl from earlier? She whispered, not as quietly as she thought. The one they turned away? The man glanced, then shrugged. Probably someone's assistant. Rachel heard them, but didn't flinch. She turned her head slightly to read the marketing copy printed on a freestanding easel next to the model. It boasted of sustainable innovation, community-forward design, and ironically a warm welcome to the future of Charleston living. She could have laughed, but she didn't. Instead, she let the silence speak. Eventually, the couple walked away and Rachel made her way back to the front desk. The receptionist, now seated alone and swiping idly on her phone, looked up with thinly veiled boredom. Rachel waited until she had her attention and then asked one simple question. Would it be possible to speak with a developer's representative? The receptionist blinked. You mean like a builder? No, Rachel said, her tone pleasant. I mean someone on the ownership or financing side, not sales. Buyer. The girl hesitated, clearly caught off guard. They don't do meetings on site. That's more of a private thing. Rachel nodded. I thought as much. Just then, Holly returned from the office wing, laughing with one of the brokers. She stopped when she saw Rachel still there. Her expression darkened just slightly, like someone seeing a stray animal that refused to leave the porch. Are you still waiting? She asked, the softness of her voice carefully rehearsed, but the edge beneath it no longer hidden. No, Rachel replied. I'm done waiting. There was a pause, small, sharp, and laced with something Holly couldn't quite identify. Rachel didn't elaborate. She didn't protest, didn't ask again, didn't plead. She simply met Holly's gaze with unwavering calm, the kind that comes from someone who's been underestimated too many times to care anymore. Well then, Holly said with a brittle smile, best of luck to you. Rachel said nothing. She walked to the door, opened it herself, and stepped out into the late morning light. Outside, the clouds had started to break, thin beams of sunlight spilling down between the buildings, but forming the damp brick walkway as if the sky had changed its mind about the day. Rachel pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders and walked toward the parking lot, passing by the golf carts lined up again for the next scheduled tour. One of the drivers glanced at her, hesitated as if to offer her a seat, but thought better of it. As she reached her car, Rachel took one final glance back at the sales gallery. Behind the glass, people moved like shadows, indistinct and glossy, their outlines softened by distance. She opened the car door, sat behind the wheel, and allowed herself a single, quiet exhale. Then she took out her phone, not to call anyone, not to document or report. She opened her calendar. And she moved the meeting with her attorney up by a full week. The drive back to Mount Pleasant was long and slow, the kind of distance that didn't register in miles but in thoughts left unfinished. Rachel kept her eyes on the road, though her mind ran on a separate path entirely, winding its way through every detail of the morning like a slow replay of a silent film. She didn't feel angry, not in the way that burned. What she felt was colder, older, heavier, the quiet weight of understanding something she had always suspected, that in certain rooms, being prepared, intelligent, and sincere still wasn't enough. You had to look the part, or at least play it well. And Rachel had never been interested in playing. Her car pulled up the gravel drive of a modest coastal house shaded by sycamores and old oaks, their branches dripping with moss like time suspended. The porch sagged a little, and the wind chimes on the beam above the swing whispered their hollow tune as she stepped out. On the porch, sipping coffee from a ceramic mug with fading paint, sat her grandmother Evelyn, hair white as cotton, her eyes sharp even through the film of age. She looked up as Rachel approached, not smiling at first, just studying her with the unspoken knowing that came only from women who'd lived long enough to see the patterns in everything. Well, Evelyn said, setting the mug on the railing, you've got that look again. Like you just left a dinner party that forgot to put your name on the table. Rachel let out a tired laugh and collapsed onto the swing beside her. Something like that. She didn't launch into the story immediately. They sat for a moment in silence, listening to the rustling trees and the creak of the swing beneath them. It was Evelyn who finally broke it. You didn't think they'd recognize you, did you? Rachel shook her head. No, I didn't want them to. Evelyn gave a low hum, neither agreement nor judgment. But you still hoped they'd treat you with respect, without needing a reason. Rachel didn't answer, but her silence said everything. She leaned back, one hand resting on the arm of the swing, fingers absent-mindedly tracing the grooves in the wood. She could still see Holly's face in her mind, that smooth blend of hospitality and superiority, the carefully managed smile, the subtle edge in her voice. And she could still hear the words, "We're prioritizing serious buyers." "I kept thinking," Rachel said finally, "that maybe if I just explained clearly, they'd listen. Like I had to earn their attention. Just by being calm, being rational, being good." "You think too much of people?" Evelyn replied gently, not unkindly, "and not enough of yourself." Rachel turned her head to look at her grandmother. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Where?" "It means," Evelyn said, "you think the world will give you credit for staying quiet when you're insulted. You think dignity is the same thing as silence. And it's not." Rachel looked down at her lap. "So what do I do? You wear heels and show up in a Mercedes?" Evelyn's laugh was sudden and dry. "God, no. You'd look ridiculous. I mean, use your voice. You don't need to raise it. But don't hide it." Rachel sighed and rested her head back against the cushion. "I didn't want to pull rank. I didn't want them to think I was just throwing money around to prove a point. And you're not," Evelyn said firmly. "But you built something. You've earned your place at that table. If you keep pretending you haven't, just a test if the world will treat you right without knowing who you are, you're not helping anyone, least of all the women who come after you." Those last words settled deep in Rachel's chest, stirring something that had been sitting dormant, not resentment, not pride, but a kind of long-held ache for fairness, for equity, for all the young women who would walk into rooms like she had and be told without a word that they were invisible. She sat up a little straighter. Her hand moved to her notebook, which she had placed on the porch table earlier. She opened it again, not to the plans for Harbor's Edge, but to the page where she had written the mission statement for her foundation 2 years ago, a foundation that had started with a single investment in affordable housing and had grown into a real estate development initiative aimed at responsible land use, accessibility, and dignity in design. She tapped the edge of the page with her pen. "I don't want to prove a point," she said quietly. "I want to shape a place. One that doesn't humiliate the wrong people and reward the wrong reasons." Evelyn nodded, pleased, and took another sip of her now cold coffee. "Well," she said, standing with some effort, "then maybe it's time to stop testing them and start leading them." Rachel didn't respond. She just reached for her phone, opened her calendar again, and with a few deliberate taps, adjusted the upcoming meeting with her legal advisor, moving it not just sooner, but to a new location closer to the Harbor's Edge site. She stared at the screen for a moment longer, then quietly added a second meeting, this time with the Community Planning Board. She wasn't going to wait for permission. She had something better. Intent. The following week unfolded with a calm precision that betrayed none of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Rachel moved through her days with the same deliberate grace she always had, answering emails, reviewing documents, taking calls from attorneys and project managers. But something had shifted in her. She was no longer watching. She was acting. Each call she made was a step, each signature a doorway. Each quiet message passed through her small but deeply capable team was another thread tying together a vision that had long lived in the background of her life. Now it was stepping into the light. It was Thursday morning when the first call reached the sales office of Bellwood Hartman, a direct line from a private development firm that no one in the building recognized. The voice on the other end introduced herself simply as a representative for a private buyer interested in acquisition discussions regarding Harbor's Edge. The request wasn't for a showing or a brochure. It was a request to speak directly with the ownership board quietly, urgently, and with binding authority. Holly didn't hear about the call until late in the day. The receptionist had passed the message to the brokerage director, who had taken the meeting himself behind closed doors. leaving Holly out of the loop for reasons no one bothered to explain. She noticed it, of course. Noticed the way people spoke just a little more carefully around her, how emails stopped CCing her on certain threads. She brushed it off. At first, she had clients to deal with, showings to manage, numbers to hit. But in the back of her mind, something began to itch. She didn't like being left out, especially not of things that involved deals on her own listings. It was late afternoon when she received a text from one of her junior colleagues, Mia, the same one who'd awkwardly handled Rachel the week before. The message was short and almost apologetic. Thought you should know. Someone from Charlotte Holdings is coming by tomorrow. Apparently it's related to Harbor's Edge. Not sure why. Charlotte Holdings. Holly stared at the name. It meant nothing to her. A shell company, probably. Someone looking to buy and flip parcels. There had been whispers about that possibility ever since the city council approved the rezoning near the marina, but they were always just that, whispers. The project was still early phase. No one serious would try to grab it now, but Friday morning proved her wrong. At precisely 9:30 a.m., a black sedan pulled into the circular drive in front of the Harbor's Edge showroom. No fanfare, no entourage. Just one woman, stepping out calmly in a gray wool coat, a leather satchel over her shoulder. Her hair was tied back the same way it had been that day, simple, clean. No makeup, no statement jewelry, just presence. Rachel. Holly, standing in the lobby preparing to greet a new couple from Charlotte, froze for a second as she caught sight of her. Her body reacted faster than her thoughts. She smoothed her blouse, adjusted her posture, composed her face. Rachel walked in without hesitation. This time, no one stopped her. No assistant intercepted. No receptionist asked her to wait. The director of brokerage was already standing just past the model display, his hand extended in welcome, his smile unusually respectful. MS. Harlan, he said, and Holly's heart skipped. He said it like it meant something. Not a casual surname, not a guess. A name that came with gravity. The room tilted ever so slightly. Rachel shook the man's hand and allowed herself to be led into the back conference room without so much as a glance in Holly's direction. She didn't need to look. Holly felt it anyway, not embarrassment. Barris, not quite fear. Something worse, uncertainty. Unknowing. 2 hours passed. Holly kept up her routine, smiling at clients, adjusting numbers on screens, pointing out features of the pool deck and marina access as though everything was exactly as it had been the week before. But she could feel the shift. Even Mia seemed different, more alert, more careful, as if some new air had entered the space and everyone was trying to breathe around it without drawing attention to the change. The door to the conference room opened quietly just after noon. Rachel stepped out, followed by the director and two other men Holly hadn't seen before. They all looked serious but pleased, speaking in low tones. Rachel was the last to walk out. She paused at the entrance to the lobby, letting her eyes drift for the first time slowly, carefully across the room. Her gaze landed on Holly. They looked at each other. Not long. Not intensely. But it was enough. Rachel didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply offered a small nod, the kind given between professionals after a matter has been settled. And then she turned and walked out. The director remained, adjusting his cuffs, walking slowly toward Holly, who was still holding a portfolio she hadn't opened in 15 minutes. "I'll need you to prepare the updated client communication draft," he said, not unkindly but very much in command. "We'll be making announcements within the week." "What kind of announcements?" she asked, trying to keep her tone light. He looked at her as if deciding how much to say. Harbor's Edge is shifting its development structure. The controlling interest has changed hands. We're not leading the sale anymore. Holly blinked. "But we have scheduled tours. We have signed Mouse. Our office," he interrupted gently, "is being reassigned. Some of us will stay on in advisory roles, But the new owner has her own team. From what I understand, she prefers leaner staff and direct oversight. The words hit like a quiet blow. Not shouted, not cruel, but final. Holly stood there, lips parted, unable to speak. She was here last week, Mia whispered later that day, when the office had thinned and the news had started its slow, whispered spread. And we didn't even let her in. Holly didn't answer. She knew. The following Thursday, under a soft, pearly sky that had not yet made up its mind between spring and summer, the staff of Bellwood Hartman gathered once again at the Harbor's Edge Sales Gallery. But the mood was different now. Gone was the effortless elegance of curated showings and champagne tours. Instead, there was a quiet murmur of uncertainty and tightly pressed lips. Fewer people moved through the lobby. The lights above the model display were dimmed, and the peonies on the reception desk had started to wilt, untouched for days. There was no music playing. An internal staff meeting had been called mandatory, the email had said. Mid-morning. Business casual. Transition planning. The kind of phrasing that signaled nothing on the surface but rippled underneath with implication. Holly had spent the entire night trying to track down the new owner's name, but the documents she found were all tied to holding groups, foundations, and layers of signatures that said much but revealed nothing. Still, something in her knew. Something in the pit of her stomach, just under the practiced calm, whispered the truth long before it arrived. At precisely 10 o'clock, the conference room doors opened. Rachel entered alone. She was dressed simply, just as before, no dramatic shift in wardrobe, no statement accessories, no designer scarf or pressed power suit. But there was something different in her presence now. A centeredness, a weight, a calm authority that didn't ask for attention, only received it by nature of how still she stood and how deeply she looked at everyone in the room. She didn't have to say she belonged there. The space itself recognized it. She walked to the head of the table, not rushing, not hesitating. The director of brokerage stood beside her, his face reserved but respectful. He offered a few words about the new ownership, the upcoming restructuring, the shifting of leadership roles. And then, simply and without ceremony, he turned the floor over to Rachel. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet, but it carried easily through the room. "Most of you don't know me. Some of you may remember me. My name is Rachel Harlan. I'm the managing director of 3 urban design and housing equity initiatives, and as of this month, I hold full development rights for the Harbor's Edge project." There were no gasps, no dropped jaws, just a strange, collective stillness. Like everyone was listening with such intense focus that no one dared move. She continued. "This project means a great deal to me, not just because of its location or potential value, but because of what it could stand for. Harbor's Edge was marketed as a place where legacy meets luxury, and I think there's truth in that. But I believe legacy isn't just about inheritance or status. Legacy is what you build that outlives you. What you create that speaks to your values." She paused, letting the words settle. Around the table, faces shifted, some puzzled, some reflective, a few visibly uncomfortable. "When I came here last week," Rachel said, "I didn't identify myself. I wasn't testing anyone. I wasn't setting a trap. I simply wanted to observe how people are treated when they walk in with curiosity and humility, but without signals of wealth. And what I found was not unique to this office. It's something I've seen again and again in this industry. And it's something I intend to change." A ripple of unease moved through the group. Holly, standing near the back wall, felt her face grow warm. Rachel did not look at her, did not single her out. She didn't need to. "I'm not interested in shaming anyone," Rachel said, her tone never wavering. "But I do want this team and any future team I build to understand that hospitality is not a performance. It's a mindset. Inclusion is not a checkbox. It's a culture, and trust cannot be fabricated with a smile and a brochure. It is earned through respect." She closed the notebook she had brought with her, yes, the same worn leather-bound one from before, and looked slowly around the room. For those of you who are willing to work differently, she said, there will be opportunities to stay, to grow. I will be meeting with each of you individually in the coming days. I want to understand your strengths, your instincts, your reasons for doing what you do. Her eyes moved briefly across the room, not to intimidate, not to search for guilt, but to find something, perhaps openness, perhaps honesty. And for those who feel this isn't the right direction, I respect that. You'll be treated with fairness and dignity. But make no mistake, Harbor's Edge is no longer just a place for the few who can afford it. It's going to be a place where people want to belong, because they feel seen, because they are welcomed before they are measured. She stepped back slightly and nodded once to the director, who took her place at the front. The room remained silent. Holly didn't speak. She couldn't. Her world hadn't collapsed. That would have been easier. Instead, it had been reframed entirely, quietly, without raised voices or public spectacle. And that was somehow worse. She thought of Rachel from that first day, the plain coat, the soft voice, the refusal to flinch. She had seen her, and dismissed her. And now, standing on the edge of something she no longer controlled, she saw her again. This time, completely. A week later, the Harbor's Edge site stood bathed in the soft, golden light of late afternoon. The marsh grasses along the edge of the property swayed gently in the breeze, their pale green tips catching the sunlight like silk threads. The sales gallery had been quietly closed for renovations, its once polished glass doors now bearing a single handwritten sign taped inside, "Private meetings by appointment." Inside, the furniture had been rearranged, the floral arrangements removed, and in place of framed awards and glossy renderings, the walls now held sketches, draft concepts drawn by hand, early designs of shared green spaces, widened sidewalks, shaded benches, places where people might linger not because they had to, but because it felt like home. Rachel stood by the large central window, looking out at the future she was now tasked with shaping. She wasn't alone. At her side, Evelyn leaned lightly on her cane, her gaze sharp and proud beneath the brim of her weathered straw hat. She said little, but her silence was full of knowing. Rachel had not fired anyone publicly. She had not embarrassed Holly or spoken her name in meetings. What needed to happen happened quietly, decisions made in offices, transitions offered with grace. Some team members had chosen to leave, unwilling to shift their approach. Others, like Mia, had stayed and already begun training under new leadership, eager to rebuild the culture from the ground up. There were no headlines, no drama, no social media gotcha moments. Just a quiet change in temperature, like a season turning. Earlier that day, Rachel had walked the entire site with her project manager, marking off areas she wanted preserved for public access and others where affordability could be prioritized without compromising quality. When he'd asked why she was so determined to balance high-end design with inclusion, she had smiled softly and replied, because the view shouldn't only belong to those who can afford it. Beauty should be shared. He hadn't responded, but his expression told her he understood. Now, as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the walkways and the tops of the pines, Rachel let out a slow breath, not of exhaustion, but of release. The ache of being dismissed had passed. In its place was something steadier, clarity, perhaps even peace. She thought of all the rooms she'd walked into before this one, the ones where she'd been seen as invisible, too quiet, too modest, too young, too female, too unknown. And she realized she didn't need to be louder, flashier, or more demanding. She just needed to keep showing up. Behind her, a young architect intern passed through the room carrying a stack of samples. She hesitated, then turned back and asked, "Ms. Harlan, would you like me to set these by the entrance?" Rachel smiled and shook her head. "No, thank you. Let's leave the front clear. It should feel open when people walk in, not like they need to prove they belong." The girl nodded and continued on. Evelyn reached for Rachel's hand, her fingers cool and strong despite the years. "I wish your mother could see you now," she said softly. Rachel smiled, her eyes misting just slightly, though her voice remained steady. "She does. Every time I walk through a door, they told me not to bother knocking on." Outside, the breeze picked up. Somewhere down the road, a child laughed. The world kept turning, but this small corner of it had shifted just a little because one woman refused to apologize for being quiet, or thoughtful, or kind. She didn't seek revenge. She built a better way forward. And that was legacy. Above the door of the newly renamed Welcome Center, a brass plaque had been installed that morning. It read, "Harbor's Edge, a place for those who were once overlooked." No fanfare, just truth.